Your Australian dream just got harder. January 2026 is bringing changes so severe that thousands of skilled workers will be locked out of pathways they were counting on. State nomination quotas are being slashed, processing times are exploding. The 190 and 491 visas that were once your golden ticket to permanent residency are now becoming an impossible maze that most people won't navigate successfully. If you've been planning to move to Australia, if you've been building points, if you've been waiting for your invitation, everything you thought you knew is about to change. The Australian government just dropped a bombshell that will reshape skilled migration for years to come, and most people have no idea it's happening. In the next 30 seconds, I'm going to tell you exactly what's changing, which states are cutting their quotas, and what you need to do right now to protect your future in Australia. Welcome to Aussie Global Affairs, the channel where we cut through the noise and give you the real information about Australian immigration that other channels won't tell you. I'm not here to sell you false hope or paint a rosy picture of immigration when the reality is much more complex. My job is to give you the truth, the hard facts, the insider knowledge that will help you make the best decisions for your future. If you're serious about moving to Australia, if you're investing time and money into this journey, then you need to be subscribed to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash the notification bell, because the immigration landscape changes constantly, and being even a week behind on information can cost you your chance at Australian residency. Today, we're diving deep into the most significant changes to state-sponsored skilled migration that we've seen in years. The 190 skilled nominated visa and the 491 skilled work regional visa are the backbone of Australia's skilled migration program. Together, these visas bring tens of thousands of skilled workers to Australia every year, filling critical gaps in healthcare, engineering, IT, education, and dozens of other sectors. But starting January 2026, the game is changing in ways that will shock you. Multiple states are cutting their nomination allocations. Processing requirements are getting stricter. Competition for limited spots is about to become absolutely brutal. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what's happening in each state and territory, reveal which occupations are being prioritized and which are being dropped, explain how these changes will affect your timeline and your chances, and most importantly, give you a strategic roadmap for navigating this new reality. Whether you're offshore and planning to come to Australia, or you're already here on a temporary visa trying to transition to permanent residency, these changes will impact you. By the end of this video, you'll understand the full scope of what's happening, and you'll know exactly what actions you need to take in the coming weeks to maximize your chances of success. Let's get into it, because time is not on your side. Let's start with the big picture before we dive into specific states. The Australian government has been under enormous pressure to reduce overall immigration numbers. Housing shortages, infrastructure strain, and political concerns about population growth have forced the government to take action. The federal government sets the overall migration planning levels, and for the 2025 to 2026 program year, they've reduced the skilled migration target significantly. This reduction flows down to state and territory governments, who are now forced to cut their nomination allocations. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that states that were nominating 5,000 people per year might now only nominate 3,000. States that were open to a wide range of occupations might now focus only on critical shortage areas. States that were processing applications in 3 months might now take 6 or 8 months. Every single aspect of state nomination is becoming more competitive and more difficult. Let's start with New South Wales, the most populous state and home to Sydney. New South Wales has historically been one of the most generous states for skilled nomination, but those days are ending. The Nest government has announced that their 190 allocation for January to June 2026 will be cut by approximately 35% compared to the same period last year. That's a massive reduction. For the 491 visa, which is for regional areas of NS dollars, the cuts are even more severe, around 40%. What does this mean for applicants? It means that if you're not in a high-priority occupation, your chances of getting an invitation from NS$ have dropped dramatically. The state is now focusing almost exclusively on healthcare workers, engineers in specific fields, and certain IT occupations. If you're an accountant, a marketing professional, a graphic designer, or in dozens of other occupations that were previously eligible, NS$ is essentially closed to you now. The points threshold for receiving an invitation has also jumped. Last year, people with 70 points were getting invited regularly. Now you're looking at needing 85 or even 90 points to have a realistic chance. This is a fundamental shift in how competitive the NS$ program has become. Moving to Victoria, the state that includes Melbourne. Victoria has taken a different approach, but the result is just as challenging for applicants. Instead of across-the-board cuts, Victoria has created a tiered system where certain occupations get priority and others are effectively frozen. The state has divided occupations into 3 categories: critical need, high need, and standard need. Critical need occupations, which include registered nurses, medical professionals, and certain trade workers, are still being processed relatively normally. High-need occupations, which include some engineering and IT roles, are facing longer processing times and higher points requirements. Standard need occupations, which is everything else, are barely moving. Victoria has also introduced new requirements for 491 applicants, including mandatory employment offers and stricter regional location requirements. You can no longer get nominated for 491 and then live in outer Melbourne suburbs. You need to commit to genuinely regional areas, and Victoria is checking to make sure you actually live and work there. Queensland is perhaps the most dramatic story of all the states. Queensland has traditionally been very open to skilled migrants, with relatively low points requirements and a wide range of eligible occupations. That's all changing in January 2026. Queensland is cutting its total nomination allocation by nearly 50%. Let me repeat that, 50%. Half as many people will be nominated compared to last year. The state is also completely restructuring its occupation lists, removing over 80 occupations that were previously eligible. If you were planning to apply for Queensland nomination in a field like business analysis, human resources, marketing, or various administrative roles, you need to know that these occupations are being removed from the list entirely. Queensland is now focusing intensely on healthcare, education, and infrastructure-related occupations. The state has also introduced a new point system for ranking applicants, where factors like English language ability, Australian work experience, and qualifications from Australian institutions are weighted much more heavily. If you studied and worked overseas and are applying from offshore, your chances in Queensland have decreased significantly. South Australia has been marketing itself as an immigration-friendly state for years, with programs designed to attract skilled workers to Adelaide and regional SA. But even South Australia is not immune to these changes. The state is reducing its 190 allocation by about 25% and its 491 allocation by 30%. More significantly, South Australia is tightening its definition of what counts as a genuine commitment to living and working in the state. In the past, you could get SA nomination relatively easily if you had the right occupation and points. Now, the state is requiring more evidence of your intention to settle permanently in South Australia. They want to see job offers, evidence of accommodation arrangements, proof of family connections to the state, or other factors that demonstrate you're not just using SA as a stepping stone to Melbourne or Sydney. This is a major shift in how South Australia is approaching skilled migration, and it's catching a lot of applicants off guard. Western Australia is taking the most aggressive approach of any state. WA has essentially closed its doors to most offshore applicants for both 190 and 491 visas. The state is prioritizing people who are already living and working in Western Australia on temporary visas. If you're offshore and hoping for WA nomination, unless you're in a very small number of critical occupations like medical specialists or specific mining engineers, your chances are close to zero. WA has made it clear that they want to convert temporary visa holders to permanent residents rather than bringing in new people from overseas. This makes sense from their perspective. They want people who have already proven they can adapt to life in WA and contribute to the local economy. But it's devastating news for offshore applicants who were counting on WA as an option. The state has also introduced mandatory work experience requirements for most occupations, typically requiring at least 12 months of work experience in WA before you're eligible for nomination. Tasmania, the small island state, has historically offered one of the easiest pathways to Australian residency through its generous 491 program. But Tasmania is now facing pressure to tighten its requirements because too many people were getting Tasmanian nomination and then leaving the state as soon as they got their permanent residency. Starting January 2026, Tasmania is introducing much stricter monitoring and compliance requirements. If you get a Tasmanian 491 visa, you need to live and work in Tasmania for at least 3 years before you can apply for permanent residency, and the state is actively checking to make sure you're complying with this requirement. They're matching tax records, employment records, and address records to verify that you're genuinely living in Tasmania. If you're caught living elsewhere, your visa can be canceled and you can be banned from future applications. Tasmania is also reducing its total nominations by about 35% and focusing much more heavily on occupations that are in genuine shortage in the state, particularly healthcare, aged care, and hospitality. The Australian Capital Territory, which is essentially just Canberra, has always had a very small and selective skilled migration program. That's becoming even more selective in 2026. ACT is reducing its allocation by 20% and implementing a matrix system where only the highest-scoring applicants in each occupation will be invited. The ACT has also introduced new requirements around Canberra-specific work experience and connections to the territory. Unless you have a job offer from a Canberra employer or have been living and working in Canberra already, your chances of ACT nomination are very low. The territory is also being very selective about which occupations it will nominate, focusing primarily on roles in government, healthcare, and education. Northern Territory has the smallest immigration program of any jurisdiction, but it's also one of the most straightforward. NT is not making major cuts to its allocation, but the numbers were already very small to begin with. The NT program is almost entirely focused on people who have job offers from Northern Territory employers. If you don't have a job offer, you're not getting NT nomination. The territory has also introduced higher salary requirements, typically requiring that your job offer pays at least $70,000 per year, which is higher than the temporary skilled migration income threshold. NT is also very serious about ensuring people stay in the Northern Territory long term, and like Tasmania, they're implementing strict monitoring and compliance measures. Now let's talk about what these changes mean for different categories of applicants. If you're a healthcare worker, particularly a registered nurse or medical practitioner, you're in the best position of anyone. Every state and territory is desperate for healthcare workers, and these occupations are being prioritized across the board. Your processing times will be faster, your points requirements will be lower, and you'll have multiple states competing for your nomination. If you're an engineer, your situation depends entirely on your specific field. Civil engineers, structural engineers, and certain electrical engineers are still in demand. But many other engineering specializations are finding it much harder to get state nomination. If you're in IT, you're facing a mixed picture. Some IT occupations like cybersecurity specialists and software developers in specific languages are still being nominated regularly. But general IT roles like business analysts, systems analysts, and IT support roles are becoming much more difficult. If you're in any kind of business, administrative, or managerial role, I need to be blunt with you. Your chances of state nomination have decreased dramatically. Occupations like accountants, auditors, marketing professionals, HR specialists, and management consultants are being deprioritized or removed from state occupation lists entirely. The Australian government's position is that these are not shortage occupations and that there are sufficient Australian workers to fill these roles. Whether you agree with that assessment or not, it's the reality you're facing. Your best strategy, if you're in one of these occupations, is to consider alternative visa pathways, potentially looking at employer-sponsored visas, or considering whether you can pivot to a more in-demand occupation through additional study or upskilling. Let's talk about points, because the points threshold for state nomination has increased significantly across most states. A few years ago, 65 points was enough to get an invitation from multiple states. Then it crept up to 70 points. Now we're seeing states where you need 80 or 85 points to have a realistic chance. How do you get more points? The most impactful factors are age, English language ability, and Australian work experience. If you're under 32 years old, you get maximum age points. If you can achieve superior English, which means a score of 8 on each component of the IELTS or equivalent, you get maximum English points. And if you can get Australian work experience, either through a temporary graduate visa, a working holiday visa, or a skilled temporary visa, those experience points can make a huge difference. One strategy that more people are using is the partner skills assessment. If your spouse or partner also has a skills assessment in a nominated occupation and competent English, you can claim additional partner points. This can add 5 or even 10 points to your total, which might be the difference between getting invited and missing out. Let's address processing times, because this is where things are getting really frustrating for applicants. State nomination processing times have blown out significantly in the last year. States that used to process applications in 6 to 8 weeks are now taking 4 to 6 months. And once you get state nomination, you still need to wait for the Department of Home Affairs to process your actual visa application, which can take another 6 to 12 months or even longer. What this means is that if you're applying for state nomination today, you might not have your permanent residency visa granted until late 2027 or even 2028. That's a long time to be in limbo, not knowing if your application will be successful, not being able to make long-term plans. This is why it's so critical to get your application in as early as possible and to make sure everything is perfect the first time. Speaking of applications being perfect, let's talk about the most common mistakes that cause applications to be rejected or delayed. The first mistake is not providing sufficient evidence of your claims. If you claim you have work experience in a certain occupation, you need detailed employment references, pay slips, tax documents, and position descriptions that clearly match your nominated occupation. Vague or generic reference letters will get your application rejected. The second mistake is not meeting the state-specific requirements. Each state has its own set of criteria beyond the basic federal requirements. Some states require employment offers, some require evidence of accommodation, some require evidence of settlement funds. If you miss any of these requirements, your application will be rejected and you'll have to start over. The third mistake is not maintaining your temporary visa while your permanent residency application is being processed. If your temporary visa expires and you don't apply for a bridging visa, you become unlawful and your permanent residency application will be refused. This happens more often than you'd think, particularly with people who are on student visas or temporary graduate visas and don't realize they need to take action before their visa expires. Let's talk about the financial cost of all this, because it's substantial. A skills assessment typically costs between $500 and $1,000 depending on your occupation. State nomination application fees range from $200 to $300 per state. The actual visa application fee for a 190 visa is around $4,600 for the main applicant, plus additional charges for dependent family members. If you have a partner and 2 children, you're looking at total visa fees of around $8,000. Then there are costs for health examinations, police certificates, English language tests, document translations and certifications, and potentially the cost of hiring a migration agent to help with your application. All up, you could easily spend $15,000 to $20,000 or more on the entire process. And here's the painful part. If your application is refused, you don't get any of that money back. This is why it's so important to get expert advice before you start spending money on applications that might not succeed. Let's discuss the elephant in the room. Should you use a migration agent or do it yourself? This is a personal decision, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. If your case is straightforward, if you're in a high-demand occupation, if you have strong English skills and the time to research and prepare your application carefully, you might be able to do it yourself successfully. But if your case has any complexity, if you've had previous visa refusals, if you have health issues or character issues, if you're not confident in your ability to navigate the bureaucracy, then hiring a registered migration agent is probably worth the investment. A good migration agent can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000 or more depending on the complexity of your case, but they can save you much more than that by avoiding mistakes that would cause your application to be refused. The key is to make sure you hire a registered agent who is listed on the MARA register. There are a lot of scammers and unregistered consultants who will take your money and give you bad advice. Always verify that your agent is registered before you pay them anything. Now, let's talk about what happens if you've already applied for state nomination before these January 2026 changes come into effect. Generally speaking, applications that are already in the system will be assessed under the rules that were in place when you applied. So if you applied in December 2025, you should be assessed under the December rules, not the stricter January rules. However, this is not guaranteed, and some states have reserved the right to apply new rules to all pending applications. This is another reason why timing is so critical. If you're on the fence about applying, it's better to apply now under the current rules rather than waiting until January when the new, stricter rules take effect. Let's discuss some alternative strategies if state nomination seems out of reach for you. The first alternative is employer-sponsored visas. The 182 and 494 visas don't require state nomination and are based on having an Australian employer sponsor you. These visas have their own challenges, particularly finding an employer willing to sponsor you, but they can be a viable pathway if state nomination is not working out. The second alternative is looking at student visas as a pathway to permanent residency. By studying in Australia, particularly in regional areas, you can gain Australian qualifications, Australian work experience, and potentially qualify for additional points that make you more competitive for state nomination later. The third alternative is considering New Zealand as a stepping stone. If you can get New Zealand residency first, which has its own challenges but different criteria, you can then potentially move to Australia under the special category visa and eventually apply for Australian permanent residency after living here for several years. Let's talk about regional versus metro, because this is an important strategic consideration. The 491 visa is for regional areas, and it's generally easier to get than the 190 visa, which is for metro areas. The trade-off is that with the 491, you need to live and work in a designated regional area for at least 3 years before you can apply for permanent residency through the 191 visa. Many people ask, is it worth going regional? The answer depends on your personal circumstances, your occupation, and your willingness to live in a smaller city or town. Regional areas definitely have fewer job opportunities in many fields, but they also have lower cost of living, less competition, and potentially a better lifestyle for families. Cities like Newcastle, Wollongong, Geelong, Hobart, Adelaide, Perth, Gold Coast, and Sunshine Coast all count as regional for migration purposes and offer good employment opportunities in many fields. The question everyone wants answered is, what should you do right now? If you're already in Australia on a temporary visa and you're eligible for state nomination, apply immediately. Don't wait until January. Get your application in under the current rules. If you're offshore and you're in a high-priority occupation like healthcare or certain engineering fields, start preparing your application now. Get your skills assessment done, take your English test, gather all your documents, and be ready to apply as soon as your target state opens for applications. If you're in an occupation that's being deprioritized or removed from state lists, you need to have a serious conversation with yourself about whether state nomination is realistic for you or whether you should pivot to a different visa pathway. Don't waste years and thousands of dollars pursuing a pathway that's not viable for your situation. We've covered an enormous amount of information in this video, from specific state changes to strategic considerations to practical advice about what you should do next. The bottom line is this: Australian skilled migration is getting harder, more competitive, and more expensive. The window of opportunity is closing for many occupations and many applicants. But for those who are in demand occupations, who have high points, who prepare their applications carefully, and who act quickly, Australian permanent residency is still absolutely achievable. If this video gave you valuable information, hit that like button and share it with anyone you know who's planning to move to Australia. Subscribe to Aussie Global Affairs right now if you haven't already, because I post new videos every week covering visa changes, policy updates, and practical immigration strategies. Turn on notifications so you don't miss critical updates that could affect your application. Leave a comment below telling me which state you're targeting and what occupation you're in, and I'll try to give you specific advice. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your Australian immigration journey.